The following show is brought to you in part by the Fetzer Institute, fostering awareness of the power that love and forgiveness can have in our world. Please go to fetzer.org for more information.
Hello and welcome. We have a very important topic tonight. We're going to be talking in a two-part series, actually, with a second show in a week, on the big topic of forgiveness. My guest is an amazing man. He's a local man with an international reputation and reach. His name is Dr. Mark Umbreit. Mark is a professor at the University of Minnesota School of Social Work. He is the founding director of the Center for Restorative Justice and Peacemaking at the U. He's been working around the world with peacemaking initiatives, doing training, doing research, teaching. He is the author of 8 books and about 200 publications. He's a busy, busy man. He has stories to tell and a wonderful book we're going to show you, and a film that next week will be aired on this station, and so you can look forward to that. I'd like to even say more about you, Mark, but welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mary.
And you have been so busy with this wonderful, wonderful, really kind of a mission, I would define it as.
Well, this might sound odd, but this was not something I picked out as a career way back in the 1970s, a long time ago. This came into my life in a way that blossomed in ways I could never have imagined.
Kind of an evolution, as I remember you have said. For those who are not familiar with the concept of restorative justice or restorative dialogue, we're going to be using those phrases throughout the interview tonight and in the film next week. Do you want to set the stage, so to speak, and define what that is?
Sure. Restorative justice is a very different way of viewing and understanding and how to respond to crime. Restorative justice views crime as a wound within the community, and justice requires accountability and healing. Healing for all that are impacted by it, with a particular focus on those who have been victimized and the victimized communities, but also the offender and their families. Yeah, you need to hold them accountable, but they're still part of our community. We have to find ways of bringing them back into the community.
I think a lot of people would say, how can you even consider getting together with people with such divergent needs and histories? And yet you have had great success with this approach. Well, and it's really like a paradigm shift, isn't it, in the field of criminal justice?
It's a huge paradigm shift, and it's actually beyond just criminal justice. But I need to make something very clear. The majority of people that have been victimized by crime or victims of political violence in other countries would not want to meet face-to-face. However, we are learning through research I've done and many others and through practice that far more do than you would ever imagine. Far more, including people involved in very, very serious crime. People reach a point in their lives of hanging on to understandable anger and kind of eating away your inside, almost like a poison, and bringing no peace, that they realize at some point they need to confront the source of their pain, their terror. Restorative dialogue is not about telling people you should confront the person who hurt you. No, 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 no. It's waiting to be responsive to their expression of the need to do that. It's always voluntary on both parties. A judge doesn't say, you must meet the person you hurt. It's voluntary
And
for the
that's
offender as well
important,
as
isn't it?
it's extremely important. The other extremely important thing with restorative dialogue is the preparation. You don't just say, okay, you're going to meet, let's come together. No, no, no. The mediator, the facilitator will spend anywhere from 1 to 2, 3 meetings to far more, which I'll talk about in a very difficult case later. The preparation cannot be overemphasized.
I was really thinking hard about the process because it's very, very drawn out, really, in most cases.
Well,
and people have to really be willing to work, don't they?
well, again, I want to put it in context. Probably 95% of cases that are referred to the hundreds and hundreds of restorative justice programs, dialogue programs like victim offender mediation, family group conferencing, peacemaking circles, 95% are property crimes, minor assaults. They're not the real serious kind of crimes that you see all over the media. And typically in those cases, it's a matter of meeting with the victim and their support people and family if they want to participate once, and then meeting with the offender once, and then bringing them together.
It's not always a long, drawn-out process,
That's
is it?
because most cases are the run-of-the-mill kind of crime, which are not the big dramatic ones. However, there's a small but growing number of cases, and there's now 27 states, including Minnesota, that have formal protocol that victims of the most violent kind of crime, including first-degree murder, can meet the prisoner if the prisoner is willing. It's voluntary for them. And for those cases which are victim-initiated, oftentimes 8 years later, sometimes 20 years later or longer, there is a lot more preparation, anywhere from 3 to 6 months to as much as a couple years.
In the reading I did, and in reading your new book, which we'll show you later, the cases were more serious. So the process was longer and more complex. But why don't you, if you would, Mark, tell us a story about one of the cases that you've worked with that you feel exemplifies the process and maybe for viewers would make it come to life.
For many years, I've specialized in working with victims of severe violence as a practitioner, not just as a researcher. And in most of those cases, you know, it's 3 to 6 to 9 months of preparation. But the case of Pam and Julius, which is highlighted in the film that'll be shown in next week, was one of the tougher ones. It involved, in sum total, probably 2.5 years of preparation or longer. It was one of the most angry cases I've ever experienced. When Pam came to me, more than 20 years after her father was viciously killed, stabbed 40 times in St. Paul, she came to me 20 years plus later. I immediately picked up enormous anger, understandable, and with her husband. There's always some levels of anger, usually,
Sure.
but this was really intense. And between, you know, I began preparation with her and with Julius, who was in prison, but it went on and off. We'd get close to having them come together, and then she'd pull back. Then my crazy travel schedule got in the way of trying to coordinate dates. But in total, it took over a couple years. And when we brought them together at a prison here in Minnesota, I was not sure how it would go. I sensed
It could have blown up, in other words.
I didn't think it would blow up, but it could have had potential for that, which never has happened in these cases, mine or others. But I thought it might not be as emotional or as impactful as these cases typically are. But I was open to it, because intuitively I felt this was a strong lady in need of healing for herself without doing harm to someone else, even though there was the language of anger. And when they were brought together, it was incredible.
Now, she was the daughter of the man who was murdered by Julius. And had she initiated the process?
Absolutely.
She had.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to clarify that.
Absolutely. It's always victim
Was he
initiated.
willing to meet with her?
He was not so sure initially. And you know that's why preparation takes a long time, because you don't want to force a prisoner either to make a quick decision. They got to own up to it and be willing to get into it. And he eventually was.
So in the film next week, you will see kind of the outcome of that. But I shake my head when I think about it, because it's amazing what the dialogue and honest conversation can do, Mark, isn't it?
You know, many, many years ago, when I first got into these more violent cases, which was in the late 80s, I was doing the nonviolent cases even in the 70s, I thought these were anecdotal stories, special people that were particularly forgiving. The first case like this in the state of Minnesota, which you did a show on probably 10 years ago, the Strufert family.
Right.
University
Carrie,
of Minnesota.
was it Carrie?
It was Karen Strufert,
Karen.
a University of Minnesota student who was home after spring break, and she was viciously kidnapped, raped, and murdered. That was the first case ever done in this state using this kind of process. And even then, I thought, these are anecdotal stories.
Kind of
the
fluke.
Strufert family were a special kind of family that wanted to get into this. I no longer believe that at all. Because I've witnessed it, I've seen it in my work in Palestine and in Israel, in Northern Ireland, work with Liberians, work I'm currently doing in Turkey. It's an incredible phenomenon. I do not want to overhype this by suggesting everyone would want to do this. No. But the level of people who have been severely harmed, once they've hung onto the poison of anger for a long time, it eats yourself out. You reach a point oftentimes, not always, of realizing to free myself, I need to confront the source of my terror.
So forgiveness becomes the goal, but is it a spoken goal when you go into the time with these two people?
I really need to clarify what you just said. Forgiveness is not the goal of restorative dialogue. It's a beautiful outcome that doesn't always happen. It is not about saying you need to go into restorative dialogue to forgive. No.
What would you say is the goal?
The goal is to create a safe place where people can talk about the real impact, the pain, the suffering that both have experienced, but particularly the person victimized. And to look at, is there any way of repairing the harm at some realistic level, emotionally repairing the harm, sometimes even setting up a memorial fund for the person who was killed or harmed.
So that could happen without forgiveness, you're saying?
It's an absolute paradox. Forgiveness in restorative justice is a paradox. The less you speak about forgiveness in the preparation process, and I don't speak about it at all unless the victim brings it up, the less you speak about it, the more likely people are going to feel safe enough, if they want forgiveness, to speak about it. They'll bring it up spontaneously. And the more you talk about it and encourage it in the preparation, the less likely people are going to feel safe to go there.
That is a
It
paradox.
sounds preachy.
That is a paradox. And I didn't realize this in thinking about this topic.
I cannot
somehow
overemphasize it.
Yeah, that's
Restorative
fascinating.
justice is not about promoting forgiveness. It's a wonderful outcome. It's a beautiful outcome, but it's not.
It's often does result,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And what are the benefits to both sides with forgiveness? Because I thought a lot about this topic and thought, wow, the benefits are huge.
Forgiveness is so misunderstood. You know, it's oftentimes in the land of shoulds. You know, you should forgive. Our parents taught us that. Or maybe we're a person of faith, and whether it's Islam, Judaism, Christianity, you know, it's all kinds of language. You should forgive. That's understandable. That's important in its own way. But, you know, deep forgiveness, it's a beautiful gift to yourself. It's a way of freedom. It's a gift of awakening, a gift of freedom, cutting that cord of connecting you to this person that's got you in self-talk, that's always making you think of the awful thing they did. It's not forgetting.
So it releases your energy.
It releases your energy. It frees you. Hopefully, it'll be of benefit to the other person in some way. But as you'll see in the film, you'll hear these people speak, not just my voice. They'll talk about the experience, even though they never had planned on forgiving. And the ultimate irony, the deepest expressions of forgiveness I've witnessed in my life, the word is most oftentimes not there. It's what I call the energy of forgiveness. It's palpable.
And that's why we're calling this show The Energy of
Yes.
Forgiveness. And you use that in your work. So the person who is doing the forgiving, would you say usually benefits the most?
I think so, but I don't want to sound too
You
positive.
can't-
Each case is different.
Can't say for
But
sure,
it's
of
it's a
course.
value to both. For example, a case I did a number of years ago, where I never, in 10 months of preparation, never brought up the topic of forgiveness. but it came up spontaneously during the time because this person felt so safe. And when she offered that to the man who killed her father, this prisoner not only teared up, he just sobbed. And it was such a gift. And he talked about the gift it was to him and the release for him, too.
So anger, when we hang on to it, it just does bad things to us,
Bishop
doesn't it?
Tutu, who led the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process in South Africa, speaks about how holding on to deep anger is like taking a daily dose of rat poison and expecting the rat to die. It's, anger is understandable. I'm not trying to dismiss that, but simply and in fact, it's important to find healthy ways of expressing anger, but holding on to anger forever and ever and ever, it's hurting yourself more. The other person's going on with their life. They're not thinking about it.
As I read your book and as I watched the film, I started thinking, are there people in my life that I need to forgive? Not in dramatic ways, but in small ways. And I think viewers who listen to you and who see the film, read your book, will do that kind of self-analysis or questioning.
Well, I hope so, because the book is way beyond just restorative justice. I mean, it's a number of life stories from my own journey. Some of the most beautiful expressions of forgiveness within my own family. The word was never used.
And yes, you mentioned your family. I mean, there's a great story about your father-in-law and stepfather-in-law. While we're talking about the bookmark, let me just hold up the book and we'll have our camera person zero in on it because it's hot off the press. It's called Dancing with the Energy of Conflict and Trauma. I love the title. I love the cover. And as we have alluded to, the book is full of stories of people coming from very opposite poles and having a reconciliation experience. So Dancing with Energy.
And the book also has some tools, practical tools to help us do the dance. Ways of helping work with our own energy so we don't get hooked as much and we can take care of ourselves.
I also was struck by not only one-to-one individuals can use this process, but you've used it with countries. And the story of the Israelites and the Palestinians who have the phone set up.
Yep.
Just can you describe that in a couple sentences?
There's a group in Israel that was formed quite a few years ago by Yitzhak Frankenthal called the Parents Circle Family Forum. His son was killed by Hamas long before Hamas was such a commonly known word. He ended up meeting a Palestinian man he didn't realize was Palestinian. I don't know if they were in a coffee shop or whatever, and they started talking. And they realized the Palestinian father lost his son too. They together formed this group, and today there's several hundred families, Palestinian and Israeli, that work together in restorative dialogue, speaking out for peace. They're not always popular by their governments because they're trying to humanize the other person, not demonize them. They're not diminishing the harm that's been done on both sides, but they're pointing out that we're all people.
And I think I read that there were 200,000 calls made just in 1 year between these people. And what a way to, as you say, humanize
It's a program
enemy.
called Hello Salam, Hello Shalom, Hello Peace. It's like an equivalent of a 911 number type of thing, where people on either side can dial this easy number and talk. An Israeli can talk to a Palestinian to an Israeli. That's not easy to do in that territory because the occupied territories are occupied and there's a fence around it. It's not easy. Most Israelis don't have contact with Palestinians, nor do they know what's going on in the West Bank or Gaza.
So this is a cutting-edge kind of movement, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you say, too, in your book and in the film, there are other uses outside the criminal justice system, outside the peacemaking between countries, that you see this whole concept being appropriate for.
Well, for example, in Minnesota is a pioneer in what I'm going to say. One of the most promising areas is applying restorative justice practices and dialogue in school settings. Our State Board of Education is promoting this.
So
There's schools here in the Twin Cities.
With bullies and kids bullied, or in what way, Mark?
With kids as part of their development stage in high schools and other school settings, just when conflicts come up, also in response to conflicts. Some of them deal with bullying issues.
Some probably teacher-child,
Yeah.
student
That's a huge
interactions.
area.
Okay.
Yeah. And
But-
also like in school settings, well, not just like in university settings and public health settings, among churches, organizations.
So all kinds of uses, which again means kind of a paradigm shift for these organizations and systems too.
Yeah, very much so.
You're doing some work right now that sounds fascinating with the UN and with Turkey. And we just have a couple minutes left, but can you just give us a preview of what you're about there?
Well, I was asked by the United Nations Development Program in Turkey to help them as they're developing restorative justice throughout the whole country through a legislative process. They wanted me to pull together an international team of my colleagues to do training and do technical assistance. And I've been back and forth to Istanbul and a number of other cities and working with them for the past year. It's an amazing project. Turkey wants to enter the European Union. And because restorative justice is endorsed by the United Nations and the European Union, and the Union requires restorative justice in the legislation of new states, Turkey is
very interesting.
You know, they want it in their law because they want to become part of
So you're
the
an
European
important person for Turkey to
Union. Well,
get to
I don't know if it's me personally, but the whole process of getting
the
restorative
concept.
justice and victim offender mediation
The
in,
concept.
very important.
Well,
yeah.
that's fascinating. As I said to you earlier, we're going to next week show a film that brings to life some of the stories Mark is talking about, some of the ideas. And could you set that up and just tell us a little bit about the film? We just have a couple minutes.
Sure. The film shows 4 stories, 2 involving actual people that I've worked with. One is a parent of a murdered child, another is a child of a murdered parent. Then there's 2 larger community conflicts between Somalis and Native Americans here in Minneapolis and in clergy sex abuse. And finally, I want to point out, you can go on the website of the Center for Spirituality and Healing, where I teach, and it will be shown, and you can drill down and find restorative justice dialogue, and there's a real nice learning module there where you can see restorative dialogue in the broader sense, not just criminal justice. It'll introduce you to it more in depth.
That I'm glad you mentioned that, because that I'm sure we're piquing your interest, and you're perhaps thinking, oh, I want to read more, I want to learn more, I want to hear more. That'd be a great way to check it out. We also have several web pages, and I'd like to have you get out your pen and pencil, or paper and pencil, so you can jot some of these down. The first one is the center that Mark has founded, the Center for Restorative Justice and Peacemaking, and you can go to that by going to cchd.umn.edu/ssw/RJP. So that's the first one. And then we have another one for you. We'll put that up. This is for the Center for Spirituality and Healing that Mark just mentioned, also at the university. And that website is csh.umn.edu. And then the Fetzer Institute. We want to tell you a little bit about this wonderful institute. You can learn more about going to fetzer.org, but they've been extremely supportive of your work, and they're located in Chicago, right?
No, they're located in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Oh, I'm sorry,
And they're an
understood.
incredible organization. They're like a spiritually grounded think tank. They believe in good research, good data collection, telling of real-life stories. They're committed to uplifting the power and making more visible the power of love and forgiveness in the global community. They were founded by a pioneer in broadcasting from the 1930s and 40s who built a media empire. He actually bought the Detroit Tigers at one point in his life, and he contributed all his wealth to setting up this incredible institute, which has funded projects all over the world to go deeper than just political and economic solutions.
So a wonderful resource that we haven't learned enough about as people here in the Midwest, Kalamazoo, not that far away. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for coming down and telling some about this important, interesting, wonderful concept of restorative justice and peacemaking. And your film next week, we want to point out, is called, and I want to be sure I get the title just right. Tune in next week at the same time to see Being with the Energy of Forgiveness. Hope you can join us next week for that. Thank you again, Mark, for being here tonight.